Hey, this is Tom from SarkyCode.com, and I want to go over what I did today. Um, I just wanted to try out CaptureOne. So, being a mainly Lightroom user, who only used CaptureOne a couple times a few years ago just to check it out, I wanted to see what would happen if I tried to use it for doing some edits today. Well, for one edit, I took one of my bondage photos with Raven Rose's Princess Leia bound, and I imported it into Photoshop from scratch again. I'm sorry, into Lightroom from scratch again. I did the basic edits as far as color, lighting, and whatnot, and I wanted to see what that would look like compared to CaptureOne. And now, having never really used CaptureOne and haven't touched it in a couple of years, it took me 20 minutes to do it in CaptureOne because I spent a lot of time scratching my head trying to figure out what all these new controls and buttons were. And in Lightroom, it took me about 10 minutes. And this isn't really which one's better, but if you're a Lightroom user and you start using CaptureOne, what can you expect? And I took a little bit of time in between the two edits just so that I wasn't necessarily trying to recreate the other image, but try to uh, interpret the controls to come up with an image that my brain thought would look nice. So let's go over the edits first, and these are going to be time lapse, so they're going to run through pretty fast, and I'll give some details over that, and then I'll go over the results at the end.
Okay, so here we have the image in Lightroom, and we're just quickly going through the different settings. First thing, I bring down the highlights, bring up the shadows, adjust the whites, the blacks, the white balance. Let's look for a good spot to see if I can get white reading from. I end up going with the brush strap, and then making some manual adjustments to there. It's a little too warm. I tried to mess around with the color calibration settings, but wound up putting it back to where I normally keep it. Then just went in, did a little bit of tones. You know what? Yeah, that looks pretty good. A little bright maybe, but I was planning on uh, doing a little vignetting on the side. And I did bring up the face a little more. It does look a little lighter on the video than it does in the images. We'll go over the images in a back. So I brought up the face a little bit. I wasn't too particular with the placement. It's a little sloppy, but I just want to bring a little more detail up in the face. Uh, Small blemish removal. Then I try to do some skin smoothing here. I don't normally do it. I don't like it too much in Lightroom. A little bit on the face, and then I think that was pretty much it. Now we're in CaptureOne, and this was totally different experience. Everything's different. This first couple minutes I just went looking around, poking around what's in there. The highlights and the shadow bars don't really, well, the shadow, you lift up the shadows, you can't really bring it down. You could bring down the highlights, you can't really bring it up. If you want to make changes, you have to do it in the curves. Um, there are no brushes. Well, no radiant tool. You can do layers and mask them with the brush there. And I was trying to just bring up the levels in the face here like I did in the Lightroom. Played around with the settings for white balance quite a bit. The color controls are pretty neat, and there's skin tone controls. I wasn't really sure what I was doing too much. Somebody who's done this a lot obviously gets pretty good control. So in the end, I just decided to white balance in the same spot and then adjust it. Kept going back and forth trying to change the highlights and the shadows. It was a little more confusing, but it does seem powerful. You know, the color balancing control is definitely really neat here. It gives you some stuff that you don't have in Lightroom, but I wasn't sure how best to use it. I was just kind of going through whatever. Um, and I did blemish removal and now cropping, and that's it.
All right, so that's the editing in both Lightroom and CaptureOne. Obviously sped up. First one was 10 minutes, second one was about 22 minutes. Uh, Definitely some pretty cool controls in CaptureOne, but let's look at some of the exports and figure out what we could tell from the differences. Okay, so I exported a bunch of different files, and first thing I want to take a look at, let's have a look at what the different images look like as they come directly out of the respective program. So here we're looking at the Lightroom Export, which is how it just imports the raw file with the default settings. And it's kind of muted. The colors aren't too poppy. It was a very high contrast image, so that's why we have the high contrast here. But it doesn't really, the highlights aren't really popping. It's kind of muddied looking, and I think this is why, at least originally, CaptureOne had such a good reputation for taking pictures of people, because it was it had a certain quality to it that the standard import in Adobe doesn't do that well, at least not right off the bat. So let's take a look at now let's take a look at the standard import here from CaptureOne. What we're looking at here is a slightly more saturated image. It's a little warmer, and maybe just, actually, it's hard to tell because of the saturation, but maybe it's just a little deeper in the darks and just about as neutral in the highlights. Maybe a little more contrast. There seems to be a little more definition between the lights and shadows here. Okay, so that's with the Adobe standard import. And one of the first things you want to change if you're using Adobe Photoshop is stop using Adobe standard profile and start using one of the camera profiles. Basically, you just go down to camera calibration and select, instead of Adobe standard, select one of your camera profiles. And for Canon, there's camera standard, camera neutral, camera portrait. So let's look at just camera standard compared to Adobe standard. Now this is Adobe standard, and this is camera standard, and this is looking a lot more like the CaptureOne image. A little more contrast, more saturation. There's a little more pop and sparkle between the highlights, and definitely more color. And then you can even make your own import preset to use that to import, and you can define it however you want. This one brings down the highlights a little bit, brings up the shadows, brings down the blacks, but you can do whatever you want to do, and I think increases the clarity. So find what works for you and make a preset, and then you could set it up by default when you import to apply that preset on import, so that you don't have to go through all of them and change it from Adobe standard. Because what really sucks is if you import a bunch of files as Adobe standard, start doing your edits, then realize you haven't changed it off Adobe standard, and you're not really getting the results you want in the images. Then you notice you have the wrong profile, and you set it to camera standard, camera neutral, camera portrait, whatever you want to use. Then you have to go back and redo all your edits because they're not really going to match up right. Let's take a look at the camera standard and the CaptureOne standard import. So let's see. This is CaptureOne. Yeah, it's a little darker shadows, but it's starting to look a little more like it. And you could fine tune it, but this is just it's not that important. It just kind of gets you to a starting point. Okay, now let's take a look at the edited image. Well, let's take a look at this edited image from Lightroom. Definitely a lot brighter. Could have been a little better with the dodging of the face. I mean, you don't really see it here, but when you compare it with other images, it kind of starts to stand out. So let's do this. Oops. Okay, so here we have the Lightroom image, and it looks pretty nice. And here we have the CaptureOne image, and like I said, I basically just adjusted it what I thought looked right, and I didn't compare it to what I exported from Lightroom. And it looks all right. It looks a little darker and more contrastier than I wanted. Comparing it to the Lightroom image, I brightened the face more. The color is definitely more warm here, and more the flesh tone's more like a kind of like more yellow here and pinker here, and I think this is more natural, more along with the model's complexion and skin tones. So after seeing that, I decided, well, let's go and try to make some changes. I just try to white balance a little better now. Now it's maybe went a little too far. Now it's the Lightroom one that looks a little too warm, too green, too yellow. This is blue. Yeah, and the highlighting in the face is totally different. So definitely, the other thing I noticed is the skin looks harsher here. The highlights, I couldn't bring them down as much as I wanted to within the sliders. I need to go into curves, and I'm not sure I did that right. If I like this softer effect, that's more of what I was going for. All right, let's oops, that was the second white balance. This is the first one. Yeah, this is a little bit off, and the skin definitely looks harsher. And for male portraits, it may look nicer because you get more definition, but for women, you generally want a softer look, more less clarity. And I think that's one of the things that I noticed in CaptureOne. The clarity either was set higher or just has a bigger effect, and I didn't really compensate for it. So I reduced the contrast a little bit here, and so I get a little more of the same look, but the skin is looking harsher. So I tried to adjust that here, and and the skin's starting to look nicer here. It could still use a little less contrast, but it's not horrible. It's just not. It's not. I guess when comparing the two, I like the Lightroom one better, but that's also because I just know Lightroom more, and I could get what I want out of it more than I could get it from CaptureOne. But I do like the white balance a little better on CaptureOne. But that's that doesn't mean I can't get it on Lightroom. It's just, I know it's hard to explain. The Lightroom image has deeper shadows. It's more contrasty overall, but the CaptureOne image just looks harsher, and I think it's more to do with clarity. Just the skin just looks very rough, and maybe it's like over sharpened. I don't know what it is, but I was able to get the high tones a little closer to where I wanted them. I don't know. Definitely it's gonna take some time to adjust to be able to get the effect I want. But I don't see why I couldn't get both in here. And if I spent a few more hours trying to get the images to match up, I think that's possible. But I don't see, at least unless I don't see anything major as far as these types of edits go, where CaptureOne is a must-have. But like I said, the color controls are very nice in there. There's a lot of stuff related to skin tones, and it's worth knowing how to use it a little bit. It's certain cameras you get it free, I think, with the Phase 1 backs, obviously. Sony cameras, and there might have been something else. But it's definitely a nice program, and it's worth using. It's just, if you're trying to use it for the first time, it's going to take some time to get used to it. And I don't know, I'm still liking the way Lightroom came out, except for the color balance, for the white balance, and that's a fairly easy fix. But I hope you find this video useful, just to see what somebody who has very little experience with CaptureOne can do with it in a short amount of time. A lot of stuff you know from Lightroom is going to relate to it, but some of it's just going to be very confusing, and it's going to take some time to figure out. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you did, please take a second to click the thumbs up button and check out some of my other videos on the right. To keep up with future videos on photography and photo editing, click on the subscribe button on the left. You can also follow my photography on Instagram and check out my site for more photography tips and equipment.